Toxic love. After 60, are you giving so much that you're losing yourself? Have you ever stayed in a relationship not because it brought you joy, but because it made you feel needed, wanted, perhaps even alive again? In the later chapters of life, the longing to feel relevant, to be seen, to be touched, not just physically, but emotionally, can be powerful. So powerful, in fact, that we sometimes endure things we never would have tolerated in our youth. We compromise. We overlook. We tell ourselves that love requires sacrifice. But what if I told you that love, real love, should never come at the cost of your dignity? That respect, especially self-respect, is not something you surrender for companionship. This story you're about to hear is not just about heartbreak. It's about the quiet unraveling of a man who gave too much to hold on to too little, and the strength it took to reclaim himself. If you've ever felt the need to prove your worth to someone who couldn't see it, or stayed too long hoping things would change, this message is for you. And if something in these words already speaks to your experience, just leave a comment saying, "I'm still here," because you are. And what comes next might just remind you of who you've always been and what you've never lost. When someone's eyes help you remember who you are, there's something uniquely beautiful about love that comes later in life. It doesn't burn like it did in youth, nor does it rush with passion, but it gently convinces you this might be your last real chance to feel fully alive. For him, meeting her was like rediscovering a part of himself he thought had long gone quiet. She was much younger. The way she smiled, the way she spoke, carried an energy that made him feel recharged. She wasn't just gentle. She was a kind of light. She made him want to fix his collar, comb his hair, and look in the mirror with a quiet pride he hadn't felt in years. Her compliments were never grand, but they touched the places in him that had been quietly aching. She said he had the eyes of someone who'd endured loss and still held on to tenderness. That age had given him a kind of presence younger men simply didn't have, a steadiness that made him trustworthy. He began to care for her with quiet kindness, in every small gesture, in each cup of tea, in soft questions like, "How are you feeling today?" Not to prove anything, but because in her eyes he saw himself again, a man who could still listen, still love, and still had so much left to give. Small cracks begin to appear. In the beginning, everything was as gentle as when they first met. She still gave him kind looks, soft questions, and a quiet sense of being cherished, something he thought he'd never feel again. He believed that after so many quiet years, life was finally offering him a warm ending. Until one day, she said, "You should take better care of yourself." Her voice was soft, almost caring, but her eyes that day made him pause. They no longer held admiration. They held judgment. He felt his chest tighten, though he kept a smile on his face. After that, more comments followed. Every time she offered advice, he quietly wondered, "What am I doing wrong?" When she teased him about being forgetful, saying older people should be more careful, he laughed. But inside, it felt like someone had tapped on a growing crack in his heart. Those gentle suggestions soon became comparisons. She pointed out he wasn't as quick as before, that she wanted more adventure, that their age gap couldn't be ignored. He started looking in the mirror each morning, not to fix his hair, but to search for signs that he was becoming too old. Instead of speaking up, he held it in. He believed love had its ups and downs, and if he just held on, things would return to the way they were. But the more he stayed silent, the smaller he felt, within the very relationship that once made him feel more alive than ever. He didn't realize that these little things, if left unspoken, could quietly erode his trust, his confidence, and his sense of being loved. And in that silence, he began to lose connection with the one person who mattered most, himself. When love turns into control. Love, when it's not truly healthy, can quietly become a form of dependence we don't even recognize. He began living with one quiet goal: as long as she's happy. And day by day, he placed his feelings second, always second. At first, it was small things, changing his schedule for her, ignoring his own discomfort. But slowly he realized he was living to be accepted, not to be himself. She no longer looked at him with warmth. Instead came soft frowns, quiet criticisms. Some nights she sighed and said, "I need more than this." Other times, colder words. "You make me feel like I'm with a father, not a partner." These weren't slips of the tongue. They felt like knives, aimed directly at the pride he had tried so hard to hold on to. The things he once cherished in himself, kindness, calm, attentiveness, were now called boring, outdated. She compared him to younger men, more energetic, more alive, as if he were a worn-out version of what she really wanted. And yet, after each sharp remark, she somehow drew him back. A soft hug, a sudden compliment, and he'd believe he still had a chance. That if he just tried harder, the love would return to what it once was. He clung to those fleeting, sweet moments as if they were proof that the love was still real. But that mix of coldness and tenderness left him confused. He could no longer tell what was genuine and what he was convincing himself to believe. He felt like a man lost in an emotional maze, where every path led to the same wall named not enough. Disconnected from himself. When you begin to see yourself through someone else's eyes, you risk losing the most precious part of you. At some point, he realized he was no longer the man he used to be, not because of time or even age, but because of how he was living. He was in a relationship that made him constantly question his own worth. He no longer listened to his inner voice, only her reactions to everything he did. Each glance, each comment from her became a mirror, reflecting back a version of himself he didn't want to see. An aged man, clumsy and out of place, trying to please someone who no longer truly needed him. Slowly, he stopped doing the things he once enjoyed, stopped saying the things he believed, stopped laughing in the way that used to feel like home. There were nights he lay in the dark and quietly asked, "Who am I living for?" The answer caught in his throat. Not for himself, not for the simple joys that once made him feel whole, but for someone who was slowly making him forget what it meant to be him. He began to fear being alone, because in those moments, he had to face the truth. He no longer recognized the man staring back at him in the mirror. It was still his face, but the eyes had changed. No calm, no steadiness. Only the weariness of someone trying to hold on to something, without knowing if it was even real anymore. The moment of awakening. Holding on to someone while losing yourself, that's a price never worth paying. Some nights feel longer than others, not because time moves slower, but because the weight inside the heart is too heavy. That night, after what seemed like a small argument, He went to his room, closed the door, and sat silently in the dark. No lights, no music. He just needed to hear his own breath, to make sure he still existed. Her words echoed in his mind, without needing to be repeated. This time, he didn't try to reason through the pain, because now he understood. The hurt didn't come from disagreement. It came from feeling belittled, made small, judged by someone who once spoke of love. He stood up and faced the mirror. The warm light revealed a 70-year-old man, silver hair, wrinkled skin, tired eyes. But this time, he didn't see age. He saw years of living honestly, loving deeply, giving fully. Those lines on his face weren't signs of decline. They were proof of a life lived with sincerity. In that still moment, he knew he couldn't go on. He couldn't keep trading pieces of self-respect to hold on to a love built on conditions and comparison. He couldn't keep sacrificing his soul, hoping to be seen as enough. He couldn't keep living as if his worth needed constant validation. He realized that if he still loved her, he needed to leave, because love should never make him smaller. Real love, true love, should help both people grow larger in each other's hearts, not fight silently to avoid becoming a burden. That night, he didn't cry. But something quietly broke inside him. And in that same moment, something else quietly began. A small, steady belief that he still had the right to choose how he would live the rest of his life. The courage to leave. Leaving isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of loving yourself again. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. Not because he hadn't slept, but because everything inside him had grown quiet. Quiet enough to be clear. No more inner battles, no more false hope. No more pretending things would heal if he just stayed silent. He knew. Today would be the day he chose himself. When she entered the room, tired eyes and all, he looked straight into hers. He didn't blame her. He didn't accuse her. He simply spoke the truth, that he was exhausted from trying to feel worthy, that he no longer saw himself in the eyes of someone who once called him valuable, special, different, that he couldn't keep trading his dignity to hold on to a love that had lost its respect. She leaned back in her chair and said what she always did. "You're making too much of this." But this time, he didn't waver. He didn't need her to agree. He only needed to remember that the choice to stay or go had always been his, and he had ignored it for far too long. He didn't leave because he stopped loving her. He left because he finally understood. Love without care, without mutual effort, isn't love. And it's not worthy of the precious years a wholehearted man has left. That afternoon, he packed a few belongings. Not much, only what truly belonged to him. Inside, there was no anger, no bitterness, only lightness, a quiet relief, like setting down a weight carried too long. And when the door closed behind him, he knew. He wasn't just leaving a house. He was walking out of a life that had made him forget his worth. The first days of loneliness. Not all silence is frightening. Some quiet is the beginning of healing. In the first days of living alone, he didn't feel the relief people often talk about. The house felt bigger, emptier, not because it lacked furniture, but because it lacked familiar sounds. No footsteps in the kitchen, no voice responding when he spoke aloud by habit. Just the ticking clock, and a heart still learning how to be alone. At night, he'd sit by the window, watching the streetlights and listening to the wind through the trees. Sometimes he'd turn on the TV, not to watch, just to hear a voice. Sometimes he'd ask himself, "Did I make a mistake by leaving?" But instead of pushing that question away, he let it stay. He faced it. And in that stillness, something began to shift. He realized there's deep difference between loneliness and healing silence. Loneliness is when you feel invisible in a relationship. Silence is when you sit alone and don't feel lost. No more critical eyes. No more painful words. Slowly, he breathed easier, slept deeper, and began to hear himself again. One morning, while making tea, he found himself smiling. Not because anyone praised him, but because, for the first time in a long while, he felt comfortable in his own presence. No validation needed, no permission required, just the quiet knowing, I'm still here, I'm still whole, and somehow, I'm starting to feel enough. The journey back to self. No one is ever too old to start living true to who they are. Time didn't pass quickly, but it moved just enough for him to begin seeing things differently. No longer the man who walked with his head down, he now walked slowly, but with his back straight. Each morning, he made tea. Each afternoon, he played old music. Each night, he read a few pages before sleep. These small rituals stitched together the torn parts inside him, quietly, patiently. One day, he reopened his contacts and called an old friend, someone he had drifted from out of shame over his own sadness. They met for coffee and talked through the afternoon, and he realized those who knew him before he lost himself still remembered who he was, not with advice, but with presence and quiet respect. He returned to what once made him feel alive, sketching, walking under morning sun, listening to music that stirred something in his chest. Day by day, he felt like he was picking up the pieces, not to become who he once was, but to shape someone new, deeper, calmer, stronger. One evening, standing before the mirror, he looked into his own eyes once dulled by pain, and saw a different kind of light. Not the glow of youth, but something steadier, warmer, the light of someone who had survived what felt unlivable and chose to stand again. Not for anyone else, but for the quiet dignity he had decided was worth keeping. Lessons from age. Some truths only come with age, and only then are we brave enough to choose again. Not everyone has the courage to walk away from the wrong kind of love. But if you've lived through it and dared to let go, you gain lessons no peaceful day could ever teach. For him, leaving wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the first step toward becoming his own companion again. And along that quiet path, 5 lessons revealed themselves, slowly but never too late. 1. Youth isn't something to cling to, but something to respect and then gently release. We can't keep the body young forever, but we can hold on to kindness, gentleness, and quiet wisdom. Those who chase youth often miss depth, and what we truly need in later years isn't outer vibrance, but inner empathy. 2. No love is worth the cost of your dignity. Patience, forgiveness, and sacrifice are not excuses for someone to hurt you. A relationship can't survive on one person holding on while the other tears them down. Love is not about who can endure the most, but who helps the other rise without shrinking. 3. Real love begins with learning how to love yourself. It's not selfish, it's essential. If you don't see your own worth, you'll keep seeking approval, and become vulnerable to both compliments and control. But when you love yourself, you won't allow anyone in who threatens the peace you've fought so hard to build. 4. Integrity is what makes elders truly beautiful. Not clothes, not money, not titles, but the calm strength to face pain without bitterness, to walk away with grace instead of anger. It's a beauty you can't find at 20, but that shines brightly at 60, 70, and beyond if you refuse to trade it away. 5. Every heartbreak is a mirror, inviting you to see yourself more clearly. Without that relationship, he might have kept living safely, but without soul. Sometimes it's the pain that teaches us how to live honestly. It brings us back to what matters: who we are, what we need, and what we will no longer give away. You don't need to be chosen. You need to choose yourself. In the end, he didn't become someone new. He simply returned to who he had always been, before love made him question his worth. He no longer lived to please others. He lived to breathe, to be himself, to find peace in life's simplest moments. If you've listened this far, maybe somewhere in this story, you saw a reflection of yourself or someone you care about. Remember this: it's never too late to start living truthfully. You're never too old to choose kindness toward yourself. And you never need anyone's permission to walk away from what no longer nurtures you. We don't live to prove we're still worthy to someone else. We live to know our worth and protect it with everything we've got. If any part of this story touched something you felt, experienced, or silently endured, leave a comment. I choose myself. Maybe you need to hear it. Maybe someone else needs to see that it's possible. Thank you for listening to the very end. If this story meant something to you, don't hesitate to share it with someone who may need a light on their path. Until we meet again, may we keep living slower, deeper, and with more love than ever before.